In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, April 12th, here in South Korea. Monetary policymakers here are keeping their key interest rate frozen at 3.5% for the 10th straight session, as Korea's inflation remains above their target range of 2%. And in waters off Korea's southern island of Jeju, naval authorities from South Korea, the US and neighboring Japan engage in 2 days of training that also includes nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden hosts a trilateral summit with his counterparts from Japan and the Philippines to reaffirm commitment to stability in waters of the Indo-Pacific. In line with earlier expectations, Seoul Central Bank has announced intentions to keep its benchmark interest rate frozen for the 10th session in a row at 3.5%. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korea's central bank kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 3.5% as widely expected due to persistent inflation amid unstable consumer prices. The decision was announced on Friday following a monetary policy committee meeting.
Today, we determined that while core inflation is expected to continue to slow down, it is appropriate to maintain the current monetary tightening trend and check prices because of high uncertainty in the consumer price outlook.
This is the 10th consecutive meeting in which the BOK has decided to freeze the rate since it was raised to 3.5% in January last year, following 10 consecutive rate hikes in a bid to bring inflation down to a target of 2%. While on-year growth in consumer prices fell to the 2% range in January for the first time in 6 months, figures for February and March saw an upward tick back into the 3% range due to high prices of agricultural products and oil. Fresh fruit in South Korea has seen aggressive price hikes, with apples in March seeing around an 88% jump in prices compared to the same month last year. With heightened geopolitical uncertainties in the Middle East causing concern over stable supply, international oil prices also hovered around $90 per barrel at the start of April, further contributing to inflation. Recent data from the US Labor Department has also shown an increase in consumer prices in the United States, with March's CPI rising by 3.5% on year. This is the highest on-year rise seen since September last year. Federal Reserve officials expressed concerns that inflation isn't coming down fast enough in their March meeting minutes, with Fed Chair Jerome Powell calling the road to getting inflation under control sometimes bumpy. Some participants reportedly said that longer-term inflation expectations appear to still be well anchored. Given this latest commentary, economists are now expecting to see rate cuts in the Fed's September Open Market Committee meeting instead of June. As it's unlikely that the BOK will cut interest rates ahead of the United States, with the current interest rate gap between the two countries at its largest ever at 2 percentage points, the central bank could ease their monetary policy somewhat later than previously predicted. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And manufacturing production is keeping Korea's economy steady. Now, this is according to the latest economic assessment by Seoul's Finance Ministry released on this Friday. The assessment shows industrial output in February rising 2% on year and exports in March expanding over 3% on year. Meanwhile, the ministry also made note of inflation rebounding to above 3% in February and remaining at that level since then. Concern was further shared about the presence of external risk factors amid armed conflict in Ukraine and Gaza. Also, on the local front, employment expanded at a tangibly slower pace in March compared to the first 2 months of this year. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin covers this finding and more.
South Korea's on-year job growth in March fell below the 200,000 range, the lowest rise in more than 3 years. Data released by Statistics Korea on Friday shows that there were 28.4 million people in employment last month, up 173,000 from the previous year. This comes after on-year job growth was in the 300,000 range for both January and February. And it's the lowest seen since employment figures fell in February 2021 during the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is mainly due to base effect from job figures in the March period from 2021 to 2023, seeing large on-year rises, as well as the decrease in employment in the agriculture and fisheries sector due to abnormal weather patterns.
While jobs grew overall for people aged 15 to 29, employment actually fell by 131,000 compared to the previous year. That's the largest on-year drop seen since July last year, and employment of 40 to 49-year-olds also fell on year. On the other hand, there was an increase in employment for those aged 60 and above, as well as for those in their 30s and 50s. In terms of job sectors, employment figures in the agricultural and fisheries sector fell by 50,000, the largest on-year drop since 2017. And the wholesale and retail sector also saw a decrease for the first time in 6 months. But the manufacturing sector, after tumbling last year until November, recorded a rise for the 4th consecutive month in March with the addition of 49,000 jobs. Employment in the accommodation and restaurant sector was also up with 7,000 new hires, seeing an increase for the first time in 3 months. Meanwhile, March's unemployment rate stood at 3%, 0.1 percentage point up from the year before, rising for the 5th straight month. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Korea's efforts to ease its dependence on China for core materials look to take tangible form next week as an agreement on supply chain resilience under the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity goes into effect, our Pyongyang reports.
An international agreement on supply chain resilience among Indo-Pacific countries will take effect in South Korea next week, as part of the country's efforts to reduce risks in securing critical materials. Seoul's Foreign Ministry announced on Friday that the Indo-Pacific Economic Frame Agreement relating to supply chain resilience will officially enter into force starting April 17th. The deal, led by the U.S., allows member states to request and provide joint assistance through a crisis response network in case of a supply chain crisis. South Korea is the 6th country to ratify the agreement, following the U.S., Japan, Singapore, Fiji, and India. This is expected to help the country better respond to supply chain risks caused by trade restrictions from China. In 2021, South Korea suffered major disruptions to its logistics networks after China suddenly halted its urea exports. Urea solution is used in diesel vehicles, mostly cargo trucks, to cut emissions, and a dire shortage of the material led to serious disruptions in commercial transport and industries. South Korea had to fly a military oil tanker to Australia to airlift thousands of liters of urea solution. Since then, the Korean government has been pursuing a project that focuses on securing raw materials and diversifying supply chains of 16 items that the country has a heavy reliance on China, including graphite, magnesium, and urea solution. Imports from January to October last year showed the dependence on China for magnesium was 99.4%. Natural graphite was 97.7%, and urea solution was 90.3%. The South Korean government says the new IPEF supply chain agreement will boost the country's capability to respond to supply chain threats. But there are also concerns that signing the U.S.-led deal could possibly provoke China. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
In other news, an international court has ruled in favor of a New York hedge fund by calling on the government here to pay Mason Capital over 43 billion won in compensation amid dispute over the merger of 2 Samsung affiliates back in the year 2015. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
6 years after the U.S.-based hedge fund Mason Capital filed an investor-state suit against the South Korean government over a controversial 2015 merger of 2 Samsung affiliates, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands on Thursday ordered South Korea to pay $32 million in compensation. However, the ruling is just a fraction of the $200 million the New York-based fund has demanded. In fact, despite including interest on delayed payments, it represents just 16% of what Mason Capital requested. In a 2015 merger of Samsung C&T and JL Industries, a ratio of 0.35 JL shares was offered for every 1 Samsung C&T share. The hedge fund held a 2.18% share in Samsung C&T at the time and strongly objected to the merger, arguing that it undervalued Samsung C&T shares. In 2018, Mason filed a lawsuit saying that the South Korean government had unfairly intervened in favor of the merger. The controversial merger has since been at the center of a huge corruption scandal that led to the imprisonment of Samsung heir Lee Jae-yong and the eventual ousting and conviction of former President Park Geun-hye. Mason cited the results of the special investigation into corruption in state affairs, saying that it was clear evidence that the Korean government violated procedures to promote the interests of Chairman Lee's family, calling it the largest political corruption scandal in Korean history. It added that the Park administration exerted excessive influence on the state-run National Pension Service, a major shareholder in Samsung C&T, to cast its vote in favor of the merger. However, the South Korean government argued that while it's true that the former president accepted a bribe and was impeached and imprisoned for it, the bribe was received after the merger, adding that the National Pension Service is an independent corporation that's not part of the Korean government. The latest ruling marks the second time the South Korean government has been ordered to pay compensation over the controversial 2015 merger, as the PCA ordered the government to pay $53.59 million plus interest to U.S.-based hedge fund Elliott Investment Management in June 2023. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In waters of Korea's southern island of Jeju, naval authorities from South Korea, the U.S. and neighboring Japan are engaged in 2 days of training that also includes nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
Thursday afternoon in international waters south of Jeju Island. An aircraft carrier crew signals a U.S. Fa-18 Super Hornet fighter jet for liftoff from the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy fleet. The jet soars into the sky in just 3 seconds, pouring billows of smoke and tremendous heat. Around 5 fighter jets quickly took off one after another within a couple of minutes. South Korea, the U.S., and Japan kicked off a 2-day naval drill on Thursday involving 6 warships. Alongside Washington's Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, Seoul's Aegis destroyer Sohae-ryu Seongnyeong and Japan's Ariake-class destroyer participated in the training. The trilateral drill is part of the 3 countries' multi-year training initiative, which was jointly established during the Camp David summit last year. The drill was focused on strengthening joint response capabilities amid escalating nuclear and missile threats from North Korea.
While we're here, we're working on increasing our tactical proficiency. Specifically, we're working on undersea warfare exercises. We're working on maritime interdiction operations. We're working on search and rescue operations. We are working to better communicate and share data, all of which better prepare us for a crisis in the region or any contingency within the region.
And in a rare move, Washington decided to give access to the nuclear-capable aircraft carrier to members of the media from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan at the same time. It's the first time media has jointly covered a maritime drill involving the 3 countries since the Camp David summit held last August. The commander of the Carrier Strike Group 9 said the 3-way training was well-planned and well-coordinated.
It's an opportunity to work with the other navies in the region. It's an opportunity to learn about them and put names to faces.
South Korea's Navy stressed the drill was a great opportunity to increase the Allies' ability to counter North Korea's advancing nuclear and WMD threats. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in Washington, the U.S., the Philippines and Japan have pledged partnership against provocations in waters of the Indo-Pacific. Our Choi Soo-young covers the broader implications of this particular pledge.
Today, we mark a historic moment, the first ever Leaders Summit between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. And it's truly an honor to have you both here as we begin this new era of a partnership.
The United States, Japan and the Philippines have held their first trilateral summit. On Thursday local time in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and the President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., agreed on cooperation for peace in the Indo-Pacific, including countering China. President Biden said the U.S. would activate its mutual defense treaty with the Philippines if there is an attack on Philippines aircraft, ships or military forces in the South China Sea. This statement comes amid China's pressure over some of the islands under the Philippines' sovereignty in the region. Biden also mentioned promoting investment in facilities such as ports and railways connecting Manila and Subic Bay Port.
It is a partnership born not out of convenience nor of expediency, but as a natural progression of a deepening relation and robust cooperation amongst our three countries, linked by a profound respect for democracy, good governance, and the rule of law.
The U.S. is building a new framework with key Asian allies to counter China. This includes forming a lattice-like network, which includes last year's trilateral summit between South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, known as the Camp Davis Summit, as well as the AUKUS, trilateral security partnership between the U.S., UK and Australia, and the Quad, which includes the U.S., Japan, Australia and India. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida said that Japan would actively support the U.S.
I'm here to say that Japan is already standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. You are not alone. We are with you.
After the trilateral summit, the three countries released a joint statement expressing serious concerns about China's dangerous and aggressive actions in the South China Sea. Also, new initiatives countering China's Belt and Road Initiative will be announced for joint investments in energy security, economy and maritime cooperation and other areas. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Back here in this part of the world, a high-ranking Chinese official is visiting North Korea for the first time in 5 years. According to North Korean daily Nodong Shinmun on this Friday, a delegation led by Zhao Leji, China's number 3 official, landed in Pyongyang on Thursday amid an invitation from North Korea. China, for its part, had earlier spoken of promoting a year of friendship to celebrate 75 years of diplomatic relations. Separately, here in South Korea, the Unification Ministry urged for all interactions with North Korea to abide by UN Security Council resolutions.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Ukraine, a major power plant near Kyiv was destroyed by Russian airstrikes early on Thursday. The thermal power plant was among several energy facilities in various regions of Ukraine hit by missiles and drones. The destroyed Trilateral coal-fired thermal power plant, operated by a domestic energy company, Centrenergo, was one of Ukraine's largest providers of electricity and heat. Centrenergo chairman Andriy Hota said that the airstrikes destroyed 100% the transformer, the turbines, the generators, adding that the scale of destruction is terrifying. At least 2 more thermal power plants were reported to have suffered significant damage from the airstrikes. Ukraine's Air Force said that they took down 18 missiles and 39 drones out of 82 missiles and drones used by Russia in the attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on the same day that Russia was obliged to respond following Kyiv's attacks on Russia's infrastructure. A Vietnamese billionaire real estate tycoon was sentenced to death in Ho Chi Minh City on Thursday after being found guilty of fraud worth tens of billions of US dollars over an 11-year period. In what Vietnam's state media is calling the country's largest financial fraud case ever, 67-year-old Sung Milan was accused of fraudulently acquiring $44 billion in loans for herself and her aides from the Saigon Commercial Bank. Thursday's verdict also requires her to return $27 billion. Her lawyers have 15 days to appeal the verdict. 10 state prosecutors and over 6 tons of evidence were used in the trial, while 2,700 witnesses were summoned to testify. 85 others were on trial alongside Zhang Milan. All were found guilty, with sentences ranging from suspended jail terms to life imprisonment. The former interpreter of Japanese baseball star Shohei Ohtani was charged with bank fraud on Thursday for stealing over $16 million from the Los Angeles Dodgers player. Ipei Mizuhara allegedly helped Ohtani to set up a bank account from which Mizuhara is accused of sending millions in funds to an illegal sports gambling operation. Bank fraud carries a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. Previously, Ohtani told reporters at a press conference on March 25th that he had never bet on baseball or paid a bookmaker, saying that he was a victim of Mizuhara. Ohtani signed a record $700 million 10-year contract with the Dodgers in the current season. However, federal investigators have reportedly not found any evidence of Mizuhara placing bets on baseball games. Former U.S. football star and actor O.J. Simpson, who was acquitted of the murder of his ex-wife in a 1995 trial, died at the age of 76 on Wednesday at his home in Las Vegas. One of the most popular American athletes in the 1960s and 70s, and nicknamed the Juice Simpson, was reportedly undergoing prostate cancer treatment. He began as a star running back at the University of Southern California and won the Heisman Trophy before being drafted as the Buffalo Bills' #1 draft pick. Simpson played 11 seasons of professional American football, but became a controversial figure after he was charged with the stabbing deaths of his ex-wife and her friend in 1994. In 2008, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We are expecting an early taste of summer this weekend. By Sunday, Seoul will see a high of 28 degrees Celsius, but southern provinces will not be as hot as Seoul. Sunny skies are in store for most places with warmth, except for Jeju Island, as rain is in the forecast on Sunday. Morning temperatures will also be warmer than norms, but beware of wide temperature gaps and do dress accordingly. Yesterday's sprinkle didn't help much to ease the dryness in the air. A dry advisory remains in place in the east of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do, so please stay alert against wildfires. Air quality-wise, Incheon and south of Gyeonggi-do had bad dust levels, but that will improve while the rest of the country will have decent air quality all day under bright skies. Seoul gets up to 24 degrees, Daegu, Daejeon, Gwangju getting up to 25 degrees. This weekend's June warms will ease next week with nationwide rain in the forecast. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, on that note, we end our afternoon newscast for this Friday here in Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.